My name is Ava Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a senior editor at a major publishing company. My life, for the most part, is straightforward. I work hard, put in long hours, and, for the most part, I enjoy my job. But there's one part of my life that has always been more complicated than the rest, the family dynamic. And that's where my story begins. You see, my relationship with my mother-in-law, Karen, was always strained. From the very beginning, I could sense her disapproval. No, it wasn't even just disapproval, it was something more subtle, more insidious. She never outright disliked me, but I could tell she never truly accepted me as her son's wife. There were always the little comments, the thinly veiled jabs, the way she'd compliment my appearance while somehow making it sound like an insult. It was always there, just under the surface, this feeling that she was waiting for me to fail or fall short in some way. It wasn't a feeling I wanted to have, but it was there, and over time, I couldn't ignore it. I met her son, Liam, in college. We had a whirlwind romance and quickly became inseparable. He was everything I had ever hoped for in a partner, kind, driven, supportive, and deeply in love with me. His family, though, was a different story. I had never been one to get overly involved in family drama, but it became clear to me early on that Karen was not exactly thrilled about the idea of me joining her family. We moved in together, and after a few years, Liam and I got married. I hoped that once we were married, things might change. Maybe Karen would warm up to me, see me as part of the family, someone worthy of her son. But no, if anything, her behavior became more passive-aggressive, more distant. She would make comments about how perfect my appearance was but would always add that natural beauty was something I should aim for, implying that I spent too much time with makeup or had too many superficial priorities. Small things, but they stung. And though Liam always defended me, I could tell it bothered him, too. He didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't want to be the one to start drama in his family. One evening, Liam suggested we have a family dinner at his parents' house, something casual to catch up. I agreed, despite the anxiety it always brought. But this time, it was supposed to be different. Liam had been hinting that maybe this dinner would help bridge the gap between his mom and me. He was hopeful, maybe even naive, but I agreed to go along with it. The dinner would be small, just me, Liam, his parents, and his younger brother, Daniel. I thought it would be a simple, easy night. Little did I know, this dinner would become the most unforgettable evening of my life. Karen greeted us at the door with her usual smile, warm but tight-lipped, like she was trying too hard to appear welcoming. As we sat down for dinner, I could already feel the tension in the air. Karen was making small talk, but I could tell she was doing it just to fill the silence. Liam and Daniel were talking about some recent project at work, but Karen's focus seemed entirely on me. I could feel her eyes on me, studying me, like she was looking for any flaw to point out, any reason to disapprove. The night went on in typical fashion, awkward, stilted, with polite conversation that never seemed to move past the surface. But then came the part of the evening that I never saw coming. Just after the main course, Karen stood up to fetch the dessert, but instead, she asked me to come help her in the kitchen. My heart sank for a moment, but I smiled and followed her, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this was her way of opening up. Once we were in the kitchen, Karen turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think it's time you and I had a little conversation," she said, her voice soft, almost honeyed. I didn't know what she was referring to. I thought this might be one of those awkward mother-in-law moments where she'd tell me what I was doing wrong in her eyes, but I braced myself for whatever was to come. "Have a seat," she instructed, pointing to one of the chairs at the small kitchen table. I sat down, my stomach tightening with every passing second. "I've been thinking a lot about you and Liam," Karen continued, her tone suddenly serious. "And I think it's time we talk about your place in this family." My heart skipped. This was it. The moment I had dreaded for years. I opened my mouth to say something, to respond, but before I could, she continued. "You see, I know that you've worked hard to fit in here, Rachel," Karen said, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But sometimes, hard work just isn't enough. You need to understand the way things really work. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What was she saying? What did she mean by that? But before I could react, she turned to grab something from the counter, what I thought was a bottle of wine, and poured it into my glass. I didn't think anything of it. I was still too caught up in her words. Karen handed me the glass, and I took it, just like I always did. I took a sip, trying to keep the conversation light, my mind still racing from the tension in her voice. But as I did, I felt something change. The wine, smooth, too smooth, seemed to hit me a little differently. I felt a slight buzz, a warmth, but it wasn't just the alcohol. It was as if something else was coursing through my veins, subtle but unmistakable. Karen was still talking, but her words seemed to blur, her voice too soft, too calm. It wasn't until I glanced at her and saw the faintest smirk on her face that I realized something was off. My stomach turned, and suddenly, I knew. She had spiked my drink. Whatever she had put in it, it was making my head swim. My first instinct was panic. I had to get out of there. But then, I remembered Liam, his blind optimism, his belief that this dinner would somehow bring us closer. I couldn't let her get away with this. I looked down at my glass. And then, an idea hit me. If Karen thought she could control the situation by making me dizzy, if she thought she could manipulate me in front of everyone, then I was going to turn the tables. I wasn't going to let her think she could get away with it. I excused myself from the kitchen, pretending to be lightheaded. Karen didn't suspect a thing, as I took my glass and walked back into the dining room. I casually swapped my glass with Liam's, a subtle move, unnoticed by anyone else in the room. I took a deep breath, already feeling the effects of whatever she had slipped into my drink. But this wasn't the end for me. It was just the beginning. As I made my way back to the dinner table, my mind was racing. The dizziness in my head was starting to settle into something far more concerning. Karen had spiked my drink, but I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I knew what she was trying to do. She thought she could manipulate me, maybe embarrass me, or even make me appear weak in front of Liam and the rest of the family. She thought this little trick would give her the upper hand, that I'd be too disoriented to even notice what she was doing. But she was wrong. I sat back down at the table, taking a deep breath, my fingers clenched tightly around my glass. The plan was in motion now. I wasn't going to let this go unnoticed. I was going to flip the script and make sure Karen understood just how dangerous it was to mess with me. As I sat there, pretending to sip my drink and take in the conversation, I let the warmth in my body spread. I wasn't completely incapacitated, but I was definitely feeling the effects of whatever she had added to my drink. My pulse was quickening, and I could feel the edges of the room blur ever so slightly. But still, I focused. The alcohol and whatever else she had put in my drink weren't going to take control. I was in control. The conversation around the table continued as if nothing had happened. Liam was laughing with his brother Daniel about some ridiculous work story, while Karen kept glancing at me from time to time. She had that same smug look on her face, the one that said, "I have the power here." But it was her moment of overconfidence that would be her downfall. I knew I had to wait. Wait for the right moment. I didn't want to make a scene just yet. I needed to gather my thoughts, to stay composed. Karen had no idea that I had already switched glasses. She thought I had just taken another sip of her tainted drink, but I had switched it with Liam's untouched one. I took another slow sip, careful not to draw attention to myself, all the while feeling the sting of betrayal gnaw at me from within. But here's the thing, Karen was playing a game she didn't understand. She thought this was a battle of wills, but what she didn't know was that I had been studying her for years. I knew her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities, just as much as she thought she knew mine. The truth was, Karen didn't understand how much of my life I had held back, how much I had kept to myself. She didn't realize that the woman she thought she could push around was the same woman who had spent years quietly building the most powerful weapon of all, patience. That night, as dinner went on, I could feel the effects of the drink slowly wear off. It wasn't the alcohol that had me fighting for control, it was the realization of how easy it had been to slip into the role she wanted to place me in. The vulnerable, easily manipulated victim. But I wasn't that woman, and I never had been. I had been playing a role, just as she had been. The truth was, I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. I was far stronger than she ever gave me credit for. As dessert was served, I had my opportunity. Karen was sitting across from me, smiling at Liam, her eyes sparkling with that same condescending glint. She thought I hadn't noticed. She thought I hadn't realized what she had done. But I had been waiting for this moment. I put my fork down, clearing my throat to get everyone's attention. Liam looked at me with a smile, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. Daniel was still talking about work, and Karen was just about to take a bite of her dessert. It was perfect. I leaned forward, my voice steady and calm. You know, Karen, I've been thinking a lot about what you said in the kitchen earlier. Her smile faltered for a brief moment, but she recovered quickly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. Oh. What exactly? I think it's time we really talk about how things are going, I said softly, keeping my gaze steady on her. About how you've treated me, and how you've tried to manipulate everything in this family to suit your own needs. There was a brief silence, the clinking of silverware slowing down as the tension in the room increased. Karen froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze turning toward me, but I didn't break my stare. This was my moment. I don't know if you realize this, Karen, I continued, but I'm not the naive person you think I am. You've been undermining me for years, trying to make me feel like I'm not enough for this family, like I'm a burden. But I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore. Her face flushed a deep red. Liam's expression shifted from curiosity to concern, while Daniel seemed unaware of the tension building. But Karen, she could see it now. The game had changed. Her eyes darted around the table, but I knew she was struggling to maintain her composure. I didn't want to make a scene, Karen, I said quietly, the words slicing through the silence. But I think you should know something. I switched the glasses. Her eyes went wide for a split second, the realization crashing down on her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. You see, I continued, I knew what you were trying to do. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought you could poison me, make me weak in front of everyone. But you underestimated me. Her face twisted in disbelief. You swapped glasses, she stammered. Yes, I said calmly, and it wasn't just the drink I switched. It was the power dynamic. Because now, I have control of the situation, and you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions. The room went quiet. The weight of the truth hit everyone at once. Liam looked between us, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern, but Karen was speechless. She didn't know how to respond. She had expected me to be passive, to retreat into the background. But instead, I had taken back the power. I stood up from the table, ignoring the awkwardness in the air. I wasn't done. As for the rest of this dinner, I said, my voice steady, I think it's best I leave. I've had enough. But I wanted to make sure you knew, what you tried to do here tonight will be the last time you ever try to manipulate me, Karen. You've crossed the line, and now, the consequences will follow. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, the shock still hanging in the air. I didn't need to explain myself further. What mattered was that I had taken control of my own narrative. And from that moment forward, I knew my life would never be the same. As I drove home that night, my heart finally slowed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was at peace, knowing that I had done something I had never done before. I stood up for myself, for the first time in a long while. The burden I had carried for so long, the tension and the weight of Karen's manipulation, was finally gone. And that was the beginning of something new, my freedom. The truth was, no one could ever take control of me again. Not Karen, not anyone. The real strength was in realizing that when someone tries to tear you down, you have the power to rise above them. And in that moment, I did. Revenge wasn't about causing harm. It was about reclaiming my own power, taking back what was mine, and showing everyone, especially Karen, that I was not someone to be underestimated. The night of the family dinner unfolded in a way I had never imagined. As I drove home, my mind replayed the moments in the dining room, each word, each expression. Karen's face, when the truth finally hit her, was etched in my memory. It wasn't just the shock or the anger, it was the realization that I wasn't the naive woman she thought I was. For years, I had let her play these subtle games, making me feel small, pushing me aside, trying to control me. But that night, I took back everything. I took control of the narrative, of my own life. As I sat in my car, heading back to my apartment, I could feel a strange sense of power coursing through my veins. It wasn't the power of revenge for revenge's sake, it was the power of reclaiming myself. For so long, I had allowed others to dictate how I felt about myself, but no more. I knew I had more work to do, but at least now, I had set the wheels in motion. The next morning, when I woke up, I wasn't immediately filled with dread or anxiety. I felt something different. I felt free. There was no longer a weight on my shoulders, no longer the feeling that I was under someone's thumb. Karen's manipulation had failed, and that was the beginning of my own transformation. I had already prepared myself for the fallout. I had sent a message to a close friend who worked in the media, detailing exactly what had happened the night before. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. I knew that the moment I left the dinner, Karen would run to Liam, spinning her version of the story, painting me as the crazy one, as someone who was overreacting. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I was going to control the story from here on out. I wrote a letter to Liam, detailing the events of the night, explaining how Karen had spiked my drink and what had been going on behind the scenes for years. I didn't want to tear his family apart, but I also couldn't let him remain blind to the truth. I didn't want to keep secrets anymore. My only regret was not confronting Karen sooner, not standing up for myself from the very beginning. But now, I was doing what I had to do. The letter was clear and precise, no overblown emotions, just facts. I attached screenshots from my phone, evidence of Karen's subtle manipulation over the years, texts she'd sent me under the guise of concern, but in reality, meant to tear me down. I made sure Liam saw the entire picture, not just Karen's version of events. That afternoon, I sent it to him. The waiting was unbearable. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had done everything I could to make sure the truth came out. By the time I had finished my workday, I had already received multiple messages from mutual friends and acquaintances, some from people who had witnessed Karen's behavior in the past, others who had heard rumors about what had happened at dinner. The word was spreading faster than I expected, but this time, it wasn't the usual whispers that passed by unnoticed. This time, it was different. Karen had been exposed. And she didn't know it yet, but it was only a matter of time before the people she had deceived, friends, family, and colleagues alike, began to question everything they thought they knew about her. I received a text from Liam later that evening. He hadn't responded right away, and I knew he needed time to process everything. But when I saw his name pop up on my phone screen, my heart skipped a beat. I took a deep breath and opened the message. I had no idea, Rachel. I'm so sorry. I'm going to talk to my mom about everything. I don't know what she's been thinking, but I'm done with the lies. I should have seen it before. I'll make this right. I promise. I stared at the screen for a long time, letting the words sink in. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be, but Liam was finally seeing his mother for who she truly was. For the first time, I felt like he was on my side, that he understood the magnitude of what had happened. The manipulation. The deceit. And finally, the betrayal. He hadn't known before, but now he did. And I had given him the clarity he needed to understand everything. Over the next few days, everything started to fall apart for Karen. I didn't want to watch her downfall. I didn't want to savor her humiliation. But what I did savor was the truth coming to light. The web of lies she had spun was unraveling quickly. Liam and I had several conversations after that first text message. I could hear the disappointment in his voice, but I could also sense a quiet relief. He had always known there was something off between me and Karen, but he had never wanted to confront it. Now, there was no way to ignore it. I had told Liam everything. I had shared the full extent of Karen's actions, from the passive-aggressive comments to the manipulation of family events. The dinner had been the breaking point. It wasn't just the drink, it was the years of built-up tension, of constant undermining. That night, Karen had crossed a line, and there was no going back from it. Liam made it clear that he was going to speak to her, that she would have to face the consequences of her actions. I wasn't sure how the conversation would go, but at least I knew that Liam was finally seeing his mother for who she truly was. He was starting to understand the extent of the manipulation, the control, and the deceit. The fallout was inevitable. Karen attempted to downplay the situation, denying everything, claiming I was overreacting. But by then, the truth had already spread too far. The friends, the family members who had heard whispers of her actions, now had their own confirmation. The damage had been done, and there was no reversing it. Her world was beginning to crumble around her. It wasn't the explosive revenge I had originally envisioned. I didn't need her to beg for forgiveness or publicly apologize. I didn't want to tear her down in front of everyone. What I wanted was for her to face the consequences of her actions. I wanted her to realize that there were repercussions for trying to control people's lives, for thinking that you could get away with deceit without someone calling you out. As the days went by, I started to reflect on what had happened. The dinner, the drink, the confrontation, it had all been a catalyst for change. Not just for me, but for Liam, too. I could see that his view of his mother was shifting. He wasn't blind anymore. The strength I had found in myself was changing the dynamic between us. We were starting to understand each other in a way we hadn't before. Looking back, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about making the other person suffer. It's about reclaiming your own power, standing up for yourself when no one else will. I hadn't sought revenge out of malice, I had done it because I deserved respect. I had fought for my dignity, for the truth to be heard, and in doing so, I had broken free from the chains of manipulation that Karen had so carefully placed around me. And in the end, that's the real power, not in watching someone fall, but in knowing that you stood tall when they tried to bring you down. You can take control of your own life, rewrite your own story, and never let anyone make you feel small again. Karen had tried to break me, but she had only made me stronger. And that was the greatest victory of all. As the weeks passed, the aftermath of that family dinner continued to unfold in unexpected ways. I had been prepared for the fallout, but seeing how everything had shifted was still surreal. Karen, once the queen of the family dynamic, had slowly but surely been dethroned. The manipulation that had been the cornerstone of her relationships was crumbling, and the truth was pouring out like a river that could no longer be contained. I had spoken to Liam multiple times after the dinner, and each conversation left me feeling more and more reassured. We were on the same page now. He finally understood the extent of his mother's actions, and it wasn't easy for him to confront the reality of it. But he was doing it. He was standing by me, for the first time ever, without hesitation. It was a long, difficult process. Trying to mend the rift between me and Karen wasn't something that would happen overnight, but at least now, we were both committed to moving forward. He even made it clear to her that she couldn't continue to treat me the way she had in the past. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As for Karen, I knew she was struggling. She had always been the person who controlled everything, who pulled the strings from behind the scenes. But now, her actions were out in the open, and there was no way to hide behind her charm or her calculated words. Her relationships with the rest of the family had already begun to fray, with whispers of her behavior spreading like wildfire. People who had once been loyal to her began to distance themselves, realizing they had been manipulated for years. The balance of power had shifted, and Karen was no longer the puppet master. I was. And as much as I had once dreaded the idea of family gatherings or awkward conversations, I now felt a sense of peace in the air. I had taken back my life, my power, and my voice. I wasn't afraid anymore. And neither was Liam. For the first time, I felt like I could truly breathe, that I could exist in this family without feeling like an outsider. I had proven to myself, and to everyone around me, that I was more than just someone they could walk over. I was strong. I was capable. And I was worth fighting for. The truth was, Karen had pushed me into a corner for so long, trying to make me small, trying to break my confidence. But instead of succumbing to her manipulation, I had used it as fuel. I had turned the betrayal into my own strength, and that strength had allowed me to reshape my future. So, when I think back on that night, the drink, the dinner, the confrontation, I don't see it as a moment of revenge in the traditional sense. No, it was more than that. It was a moment of clarity. The best revenge is not in making the other person suffer, it's in finding your own strength, your own voice, and letting that power define your path moving forward. Karen thought she could control me, but in the end, I controlled my own fate. And there's nothing more satisfying than reclaiming your own power. So here's the truth: when you stand up for yourself, when you stop letting people walk all over you, that's when you win. You don't need to tear others down to rise. You just need to rise. And when you do, the world will see you for who you really are, someone who cannot be broken.